Welcome to today's webinar, courtesy of the Kentucky Small Business Development Center in Louisville. Discover no-cost, valuable business services to help you thrive, whether starting your entrepreneurial journey or scaling your existing business. We have the resources and expertise to help you succeed. For more information, please visit our website or text 502-977-5800. Thank you for joining us today. Feel free to use the chat feature to ask questions or engage with our speaker. Let's get started.
Hi, everybody. How are you today? I'm Janet Flaw with the Kentucky Small Business Development Center in Louisville, and we're without Dave today, so it's just me, but also from our office, Claire Bridges. Hi, Claire.
Hi, Janet. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. So I'm going to get you guys started, and I actually have to leave Claire as well. So it's her show today, but she's really on it. So before we get started, as you saw in our video, the Kentucky Small Business Development Centers our no-cost confidential business assistance program. We have 12 centers throughout the Commonwealth that covers all 120 counties. So if you're looking for assistance, go to our website to get started, KentuckySBDC.com. So get started there. Before we turn everything over to Claire, we're going to stay in the spirit of Dave and ask you guys to go into our chat and tell us where you're joining us from today. We like to see how far our reach is and where within the Commonwealth you guys are coming from. So I'm going to do that real quick. Claire, if you want to as well. Yeah, Claire's in. And as always, I'm from Sellersburg, so I'm coming from our Southern Indiana location. So here we go. From Glasgow, great. Vonda and Tyson's from here in Louisville. Thomas from Texas. Hey there, Thomas. Christine's in Shepherdsville. Catherine here in Louisville. Anna Marie in Lexington, and Consuelo here in Louisville. And Paul, Columbia, Missouri.
Okay.
The University of Missouri SBDC. Hi, nice to have you.
Hello, Missouri SBDC.
Yeah. So thank you guys for participating there. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Claire, and you guys are going to have a great session.
Thanks so much, Janet. I am excited to be here today. And today we are talking all about imposter syndrome. So I'm curious to know if you're regular attendees of the Toolkit Tuesday, or if some of you in here are feeling a bit like an imposter and maybe wanted to find out a little bit more information on that. As I get my slides up and started, I will just let you know, since it's just one person here today, we are going to hold questions until the end. And then if you can put them in the chat, then we'll go through from there and have discussion afterwards. So I will address questions. You can even put them in, as we're going through, but I won't be able to look at the chat until the end. But let's get started. Owning your expertise and breaking free from imposter syndrome. This is something that we see kind of a term that's coined all over the place, but I really wanted to dig in a little deeper into, how it came about, what research there is out there, and kind of some tools to help us all, right? So our agenda today will be going through what is imposter syndrome, understanding common themes and archetypes, challenging that narrative, and then practical applications. And then, as Janet said, if you are not familiar with the SBDC yet, these are some of the things that we can help you with along your business journey, whether that's understanding your financial reports, building a business plan, connecting you to lenders if you need capital for your business. And then even with the startup process of opening an LLC or a sole proprietorship or an S corp, we're here for all of that. We do one-on-one coaching, and just happy to be a resource for you. We'll move on. Let's see here. My screen is not wanting to move forward. One second. There we go. Okay, so first of all, what is imposter syndrome? This term was coined back in the 70s by two psychologists, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, and they were professors and studied this phenomenon that they kind of caught on to. And they describe it as doubting your own abilities. So it's the experience of perceiving self-doubt in yourself and your accomplishments compared with other people, despite evidence to the contrary. That's the big piece, is that most people with imposter syndrome feel like they're not doing the best, being the best, right, the right fit for the job. However, they actually have very credible experience, very valid skills to be in the position that they are. Um, and then going on, they have classified 5 types of imposters. So let's see if any of these resonate with you all. The perfectionist is someone that focuses on how something is done. So you have to be very particular and meticulous. If there's a flaw in anything, then even if, there's one small mistake and everything else went perfectly, you're going to feel like an imposter at the end of the day. Then there's the expert whose knowledge, their concern is on what and how much you know or can do. So they have to be the expert on everything, and they have to understand all that's going on. If they're not full of that knowledge, then they feel like an imposter. Next is the soloist, and that is focused more on who is doing the work. So not that it gets done correctly and the job is over, but they want to know, okay, who did it? Who is responsible for that? Has to be you and you alone. These are people that don't tend to, you know, drag towards teamwork or collective work together. They're more siloed. And then also the next is the natural genius. So that is a person that's measures their worth, their imposter or not, on like natural speed and ease of doing a task or completing a job. If you have to struggle at it, or if you're not a master in that subject, and get through it really quick, then that's a sign of an imposter in that view of the imposter. And then lastly is the superhuman, which is a competence-based viewpoint, and it's how many roles can you fill. So this might be one that resonates with a lot of folks in the entrepreneurial space, because you are doing a lot of different roles within the business. So how many, like how overextended are you, right? If you're not doing everything, if you're not doing marketing, accounting, HR, product or service development, then you're not doing enough, right? So these are some ways to kind of constructively break down the different ways imposter syndrome shows up for folks. And then let's think through who experiences imposter syndrome. What's really interesting is that Clance and Imes, the 2 psychologists that originally coined the term imposter syndrome, um, focused largely on women, and that was like their main hypothesis in the beginning, was that women largely experienced imposter syndrome much more than the male population. Well, it turns out that's not actually true. And we're going to get into more of that later on in our talk today. But here's a good subset and an example of who can experience imposter syndrome, but actually it's prevalent everywhere in kind of all the data sets that you can pull. It's pretty even across, all demographics. However, here's a few examples. So, people with perfectionist or expert tendencies often experience imposter syndrome, may not feel good enough, or like they're doing enough or the best at something. Entrepreneurs are in there. Students, because they're still learning, because they don't have the kind of hands-on real life practical experience, can often feel imposter syndrome because they are just in the learning phase still. Ethnic minorities and first generation professionals are also common demographics that can feel imposter syndrome. And this is going to tie in also to some more digging and research that I did later on this subject. Um, but in general, across the board, most all demographics experience it in one way or another. So, because we're in the small business world, let's kind of look at why entrepreneurs really experience this feeling quite often. In one report, it said that 84% of entrepreneurs experience imposter syndrome from one time or another. And the reasoning behind that is because there's the the need for all entrepreneurs to have to wear multiple hats within the business. And I don't know about you all, but I am not an expert at every single thing there is out there, right? So you are probably really great at the product or service that you're providing. That's your passion. That's why you came into the small business world in the first place, right? But maybe accounting and bookkeeping is not your passion, right? It's not my passion. So maybe then when you're in that job mode of doing your books, reconciling your books, or working with your accountant, or trying to read through a profit and loss statement, you're deer in the headlights. Oh, what in the world am I doing here? Why am I responsible for this? How am I the one that's going to have to sort through this matter, right? So you wear multiple hats and you can't be the best at everything. So that's one reason why imposter syndrome may sneak up. The next one is isolation. So again, business owners often are siloed alone because you are at, the top, whether you are just a one person show, then you're alone. And then if not, you're the leader and everyone else is underneath you. So you don't have that kind of teamwork, camaraderie type of feel because you feel like you need to be the lead and everyone else needs to be well taken care of underneath you, which can cause isolation, cause imposter syndrome. Next, really big one that can get anyone, I think, out there is comparison. Because as you know, running a business is hard work every single day, and you have to go in and put 110% in. You're always looking for the pitfalls, the trouble spots, the, hard places that are you're either currently experiencing or may experience in the future. So you're kind of looking at the negative more often maybe than you're looking at positives. And you may be thinking grass is greener on the other side. Other entrepreneurs, they've got everything together. They don't ever have these doubts or questions, and that's just not true. So don't compare yourself to others. And then lastly is high expectations. I know that every single one of my clients wants to succeed, and they also put a lot on the line in their business or in their personal lives to be able to run their business. And so, of course, it's natural to have high expectations of success for a business. Um, and I think that's something that, that's a very reasonable feeling to have. However, it can cause imposter syndrome if the expectations aren't met or aren't met at the timeline you expected, or there's roadblocks along the way. And so I think those kind of factors within the nature of running a business play a large hand in the feeling of imposter syndrome among entrepreneurs. And then you may also kind of recognize some of these experiences in kind of highlighting, oh, this might be a light bulb moment. This is what imposter syndrome results in my day-to-day work and life. So people pleasing can be a large one. You want to just make everyone happy. You will say yes to any customer or client request. You will bend over backwards to help your employees, make their shifts work out. And actually, it's because you think that there's something flawed inherently in your right to be there. So to prove that you should be there are, worthy of being there, you people please. Another is often perfectionism, where you are not going to feel that comfort, safety, worth until something is absolutely perfect, right? Um, perfectionism and paralysis can kind of go hand in hand, where If you feel like you cannot perform something perfectly, you don't want to start it at all. And I think that's a common thread I've kind of seen with clients I work with, and I will often end my conversations with saying, "This does not need to be perfect before you come back to me with a rough draft," right? I will say, "This does not need to look tidy, neat, and clean before you send me a rough draft of your business plan." Because otherwise you will never get started. You're going to be stuck in paralysis and not ever able to move forward. And then last is procrastination. Again, if you're wondering, how am I going to be the one to do this? I've never had this experience before. I don't know what I'm doing here. You may procrastinate because some of these things are big asks for people that have not experienced that before, right? So these are the ways that it kind of affects our work and our day-to-day lives when imposter syndrome sneaks up. Um, so let's change this narrative, right? Let's take back your power. Um, there's some interesting viewpoints and actual tools to look at that we can kind of go into now as a way to counteract when imposter syndrome sneaks up from us. So first, there was a really, really interesting article I found that's called "Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome." And I know we've got all kinds of folks here, not just women in the call. So I want to just say that this does apply to everyone. But they made their point through the title, "Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome." It was co-written by these two authors, Ruchika Malhotra and Jodi Ann Burey. The article was featured in the Harvard Business Review, and it's like one of the top 100 articles read at all times within the Harvard Business Review because they really turned the idea of imposter syndrome over on itself, and it really challenges some past views of imposter syndrome, and it gives you just some great context around how to turn it around in your own head. So let's look at that. They challenged the narrative. So initially, like we talked about with the original psychologists um, who coined the term imposter syndrome, it was thought to affect women in a much larger proportion than men. And so, as research changes, things are always being updated in the science world and the mental health space and the psychology world. The more research you do, the more you learn. However, that messaging may not get across to the broad population at the same amount, at the same speed of research. So I think that since, 1978, when it was coined, to current times, there's been still a lot of drive around, oh, women might feel like imposters in a corporate role or something like that. But these authors in this article discussed the context for when imposter syndrome occurs, as opposed to focusing on the person that's experiencing it. And I want to kind of talk into this a little bit more. If you go back to thinking through those demographics we listed earlier, who experiences imposter syndrome. The folks that aren't white men often experience it, and that's because they're in spaces that are often inhabited by white men. So, therefore, they haven't seen many examples of themselves being successful in other spaces like they are, right? And so, if a first generation professional is navigating their early career, they don't have an example maybe of someone else that has done the same, that has lived the same life experience, excuse me, as they have, and understand inherently that their life experience brought them to this point with all that they needed to get there, right? Um, and so the context of who is experiencing it and where you are experiencing imposter syndrome can really kind of deflate imposter syndrome altogether. because if you understand it's not me, right? It's the context in which I'm functioning right now. Um, and then they go on to say in the article that the phenomenon of imposter syndrome is fed to women, um, and tends to pathologize instead of empower. Um, and I think not only is it fed to women, but fed to entrepreneurs, fed to, newly, um, folks that are newly in a professional career, right? Oh, how could you get here? Um, so, so really, I want you all to think about all your life experience and why you have succeeded in getting to the place you're in now. Um, and then, and then think, I'm only feeling this way because I'm comparing myself to another group or population. Um, so I really, really liked this challenging narrative from these two women authors. Kind of at the pinnacle of their article, they say at the intersection of race, gender, and all populations being fully represented within society, there are no imposters, right? No one's having to fake being something else that they aren't, right? When everyone's fully represented. Um, so I really, that one really resonated with me. Um, along with that lesson, I would say, just remember, pause first before assuming that you are experiencing imposter syndrome. Consider that your life experience and how it relates to the current consider your life experience and how it relates to current circumstances. Everything that you've done up to this point has brought you here, right? Everyone has um, believed in you, given you tools, resources to succeed. You have passed many life tests along the way to be able to establish an LLC or be able to create a product or a service along the way. And so those are very valid things. Also, remember to ask, how can you build new beliefs for both yourself and others? You don't need to follow the status quo of, I'm in a big corporate job and that's typically for older white men, right? Everyone has a place at the table. And so that belief just needs to be gone, right? And then consider how your personal experiences and your knowledge bring more to the field you're in, because I think the more diverse viewpoints, the more life experience that someone brings, um, the better chances are problems will be solved, constructive, creative thinking happens, and you never know what's going to be built from there. There's also the National Imposter Syndrome Institute. And so they've got a really good long list of tips and tricks for kind of dealing with and challenging the feeling of imposter syndrome. The first one is breaking silence. So just the experience of shame or guilt or not feeling worthy. The more you speak it out, say it out loud, the less it becomes, right? The more it's just like a thought that passes through your mind as opposed to something that is real. Separating feelings from fact. So that kind of goes hand in hand. There are times you'll feel silly or dumb or not know the answer to something, but that happens to everyone. And just because that happened doesn't mean you're not worthy of being there. You're not able to be a successful entrepreneur, business owner. Um, recognize when you should feel fraudulent, right? So I'm telling you not to feel like an imposter, but, and this ties back in with the previous article we just discussed. There are many situations in life where it's human nature to feel hesitant or not fully solid in the space, or if you're in a new space and you're the youngest person in the room, or you're the first woman, person of color, person with a disability to get to this point and achieve something, that's a normal time to feel maybe not like an imposter, but it's a normal human reaction to feel like, oh no, I'm different than this person is, right? And that's just an acknowledgement within yourself, and then you can just move on with your accomplishments. Um, to accentuate the positive. I think that's just a really good practice in life is to just make sure that you are not only dwelling on the negative, that you are making sure you're counting your successes as well. Um, and also um, coming with, positive things, perfectionist tendencies, wanting to do a good job. It also means that you deeply care about the work that you're doing and you want it to be of quality. Um, Developing a healthy response to failure and making mistakes is just, what a life skill in general, right? So, um, I think it's super healthy for kids to experience challenges or something not succeeding in the way they thought or so on. And that's because that's going to go on throughout life, right? So um, it's okay for something not to work. And I think there's a an entrepreneur influencer that I've seen, and he will show the number of businesses that he's opened that have just flopped. He's very successful, but he will talk about all of his fails all the time because his reasoning is that I couldn't get here until I did all of these things first and learned everything I could along the way about what works and what doesn't. And now I'm super successful. But if I had stopped on version 4 of my business, I would have just flopped and it would have been the end, right? Um, but he didn't let that failure over consistent, over and over failure stop him from moving forward. Um, Write the rules is another one. There's like, who is telling you that you can't be there? Who's telling you um, that you are not the right person for this role or for the job? There's actually not anyone anywhere that's saying that you can't do these things, right? So this kind of overarching, I should or I shouldn't be here or be doing this, it's just coming internally, and you're allowed to change those rules and assumptions, right? And then developing a new script. So then thinking, being consciously aware of what triggers your imposter syndrome, and then thinking, you know, oh, I can do this. I have the skills to do so. Visualizing success is a really nice practice. The professional athletes do this. You can just spend some time before a large presentation or a large, proposal or um, project that you're taking on within your business and think through it before you head into the process physically. Um, and as opposed to worrying about how it's going to go poorly, right? Visualize it going successfully. Rewarding yourself is a very helpful way to break the cycle. Just, just continually seek validation of yourself, learning, yourself on the back, and then keep going, right? Hey, that was maybe a little rough. What did I learn from that? Great. You did a good job. You found what you needed to, and you can go on. That's a reward. And then lastly is fake it till you make it. Um, we all are winging it sometimes. So, just keep winging it until you are sure, until you do find the answers, until you do feel confident in yourself. Because the more practice you have, the better, the more chances for success. Some other real life applications for overcoming imposter syndrome, and these are really nice habits to kind of incorporate into your day-to-day life. I know that you are probably short on time very often, so I understand these may not be immediate changes, but if it's something you're really struggling with, I think these could be helpful. So just keeping a journal and documenting your feelings. Maybe it's at the end of the workday, you jot down like, I worked on this project that I'm not feeling confident on. I reached out to several resources for help. That helped me um, flip the script in my head, so on. Or, hey, I gave a presentation today and it wasn't as bad as I thought, right? How can I remember that for the next time and think of the positive visualizations as opposed to the negative? Um, Next is then to periodically review that journal and do a self-assessment and say, hey, am I trending a little bit more to the positive side of things now, or am I still really struggling with certain things around imposter syndrome? Um, the next one is to document achievements and review them regularly, because your mind, human nature is going to go to the negative or the scary, um, probably more often than the positive. But what if instead of, one day you come home from work and you're down in the dumps because something didn't go as planned, and um, it's really gotten you frustrated. And so you ruminate on that over and over. What if on a good day, you came home and ruminated on the positives, the achievements that you've done over and over? And that same kind of boost in energy is going to come up as the pull down in energy. Another really, really good tool is to share your expectations and define your goals. If you do not know what you're working towards in a very clear concept, you aren't ever going to feel enough or good enough or anything. If you have defined goals that, like we talk about SMART goals and building a business plan or setting sales projections or something, um, if you can't define what success is to you, then you will constantly feel like you haven't done enough. And so if you can share your goals and define the expectations out of them, be hugely helpful. Lastly, or not lastly, but next is celebrating small wins. Um, Anytime you can, right? So if you got one new client or if you broke through with the networking in the right industry and now you think you might be able to capture a new contract in 6 months, those are small wins and they absolutely matter. Another one is to seek professional development and apply new skills. I think this is super, super important because if your fear is that you don't know enough, you're not good enough at something or what have you, then to educate yourself is empowering yourself, right? It's giving you the tools and resources you need to feel more empowered, to feel better about being able to complete the task at hand. And then applying those new skills. So I think that too, it's so easy to get stuck in, well, this is how I do my job. I'm going to do it the same way every day. I'm not going to, reach out to anything new, no new resources. I know how to do this. But if you apply the new skills, I think you're going to get a little dopamine hit because you're learning and making some brain connections in there. And you're also helping boost the product of work that you're creating anyways. So, I really liked that suggestion. And then creating a support network among peers and asking for constructive feedback. So that goes back to just naming it out loud, like we talked about earlier. If you can talk with a group of folks that has similar concerns or is in the small business space, may have gone through what you're going through right now or had a struggle similar to yours, if you can just name your struggle out loud to them, it will feel better and you will find support and you will find resources and you can get some feedback on possible other ways to go about a situation. Um, so all of these are really like practical ways to apply, like tangible ways to kind of keep imposter syndrome at bay. I do want to make one caveat as we wrap up, and that is that if you feel like there is something more troubling going on, if you feel like you're dealing with some type of mental health condition, please reach out to a medical professional. If there are tools and resources to boost yourself up and kind of beat imposter syndrome, and then there are other much more serious conditions that you could be dealing with, and that there are professionals there to help you for dealing with mental health, whether crisis or just underlying issues. So always want to make sure that's prevalent and on your mind too, that if you feel, this is a larger issue or if you've been suffering for a long time, there could be something else going on and you should seek advice from a medical professional. Um, they did say, in the beginning, imposter syndrome is not a diagnosable condition, right? This is just more of a phenomenon within folks in different spaces. So I am happy to open the chat for questions. I think looks like there may be some already here. I'm going to open that up. But if any of this resonated with you, and you want to talk more about it, you are welcome to do so. My calendar is right here on this QR code, so you can scan that and then quickly go to my Calendly link. We do one-on-one coaching sessions. It's usually often via Zoom, and then I will meet in person from time to time if it seems more beneficial that way for whatever we're working on. But anything along the terms of this presentation and or other small business resources, happy to support wherever I can. Let's see. So, okay. So love to connect. Thanks, Jennifer. I see you put your LinkedIn link here. I will link for that. Here's a question from Thomas. Do you see one kind of imposter syndrome personality type more than the rest? Perfectionism, natural genius, etc. I think probably within the small business world, within that space, um, I think probably perfectionist and then natural genius would be the two that I would say often arise, just because of the nature of what you're doing, right? Because you have to know your industry, you have to know your product so well to be in business, right? That those would probably be the ways that you got there, right? So thanks for that question, Thomas. Aprilla asked, will we get this information so we can go back and look at it? Yes. Janet will send out this recording as well as a copy of the slides so you can go back and kind of look through some of those tools that helped you pick up on tools to help move forward. Oh, hi, Emily. Thanks for joining today. Good to see you. Thanks for the note. Anyone else have any questions? I'll leave this open for a couple more minutes. Vonda asks, how do you recommend supervisors or coworkers who seem to create? See, I think maybe that whole question wasn't there. Vonda, do you mind finishing the question? Oh, seem to create self-doubt. How to do you mean how yourself to supervise people that do create self-doubt or how to deal with it? Yeah. Okay. Um, I think one in a professional, setting in a business space, the clear and concise goals and expectations is a super, super helpful one. Because if the self-doubt's there, then that is like raw data that you can go off of and say, okay, if you're doubting yourself, let's look at what's actually happening, right? Let's say, well, you marked this off the list. You reached that at 82%, which is acceptable within our operations. You reached this milestone in 6 months. And so then you can really just go off that hard data to say, there's, I understand you might have those perfectionist tendencies or feel, not fully owning yourself in this situation, but you are meeting all the expectations. That was a good one, Vonda. Let's see. Make sure there's not any other in the other chat. No question box ones. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for coming. This is a kind of something that comes up in conversation quite a bit, and I can kind of sense when it's happening with some entrepreneurs that really know their stuff but aren't kind of moving forward on everything. Um, so it was interesting for me to kind of do a little deep dive on imposter syndrome, and then happy to share all this info with you all so that you can figure out the best way to apply it within your own lives. So thanks so much for joining us. Um, Again, here's my calendar link if you would like to schedule a follow-up call. You've also got my email address there if you have any just basic questions. Um, Thanks for joining Toolkit Tuesday, and we will see you next week. Thank you all. Bye.